Well, I'll go ahead and start now, and for the benefit of anyone that may be watching this on a recording, um, my name is Chris Harvey. I'm the parishioner at St. Thomas More. Have been for a very long time. Myself and me and my family are, and I'm also happen to be the state election director for the Georgia Secretary of State's office. So we are, as we're recording this, it is October 13th. We're in the second day of advanced voting for the general election that's going to take place on November 3rd of 2020, wherein, of course, we'll elect a president, two senators in Georgia, and all the members of Congress, the entire General Assembly, in a lot of cases, sheriffs and county commissioners and all sorts of folks. So it's a big deal. And there's a lot going on in this election that I want to share with you guys. I want to go over sort of the basics of how elections work and how voting works, so that most importantly, anybody who's watching this knows how to cast a ballot and knows what to do and what not to do in casting a ballot. We'll talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of the elections. And if people join and want to ask questions, they're certainly welcome. I want to start with the structure of election, just so people understand. Don't want to get too far into the weeds. But elections are, first of all, they're state matters. So for federal elections, there really is no such thing as a federal election. Every election involving federal candidates is a state election. So on November 3rd, there will actually be 50 state elections that take place. There's no unified federal election. There is a candidate for president who will be on every ballot, but otherwise they're state functions. And then within the state, and within the state of Georgia specifically, they're really county functions. Georgia has 159 counties, which is actually the second highest number of counties of any state in the country. Only Texas has more, even though we're clearly not the second largest state. We have 159 counties, and each county has their own elections office. Your county is responsible for making sure that your voter registration is maintained, to make sure you get your ballots, to make sure that you get mailings, to make sure that they provide polling places, to make sure they provide equipment, machines. All those things are county responsibilities. The Secretary of State's office, we coordinate that thing called an election statewide. Now in Georgia, the Secretary of State's office and the legislature has provided all the equipment that counties use. So while we provide the equipment to the counties, so for example, we give DeKalb County 1,000 voting machines. It's up to DeKalb County to decide where they put them, how many polling places they have, where they put those polling places, when they staff them. All those things are county decisions. My job as a state election director is to work with basically the 159 county election directors, make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody understands the rules and the laws and the procedures, so that the voting in Georgia is as consistent across the state, whether you live in the mountains or whether you live down in the southwestern farmland, or you live on the coast, or you live in a city. Your voting experience should be the same. So I'm going to keep going to the idea that that if you have an issue, if you have a problem, you need to make sure you contact your county election office. It's a little bit like if you had an emergency situation. You wouldn't necessarily call your friend who's a surgeon if you had a medical situation. You'd call EMS and get them there to handle the emergency situation. If you've got a problem voting, you want to call your county and get them on the job. I want to mention that the registration deadline to vote in Georgia is 30 days before every election. So in this case, it was October 5th of 2020, which was a week ago yesterday. If you were registered to vote on or before October 5th, you will be eligible to vote on November 3rd. If you were not registered to vote before then, or you registered after October 5th, you will not be eligible to vote in this election. You will be able to vote in subsequent elections, but not in this election. And I've got up here on the slide, if you put in your paper application and it was postmarked by the 5th, it should count. If it was not, then it's not going to be good for this election. Obviously, you have to be registered to vote in order to vote. And just as a side note on the side, you cannot be registered to vote if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you're not a resident of Georgia, if you're not at least 17 and a half. You have to be 18 in order to actually cast a vote. You've not been, or you cannot vote if you have been declared mentally incompetent by a court, you cannot register to vote or vote if you are serving any portion of a felony sentence. And that's for any felony crime, and that includes any type of probation or parole. As far as casting a vote, you have three options in Georgia. You have absentee by mail, advance in person for 3 weeks before the election day, and then on election day itself. We'll go through each one of those and sort of the pros and cons of casting a ballot. Absentee by mail is just what it sounds like. Any voter in Georgia can request to vote by mail. You don't need a reason. You don't need an excuse. Some states you have to have a doctor's note. Some states you have to swear that you're going to be out of town or unavailable. In Georgia, all you have to do is ask for an absentee ballot and your county will send you one. But you must ask for it. A couple states, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, automatically mail voters ballots. Those are the only 3 states that do that on a regular basis. Georgia does not do that. So you have to request an absentee ballot from your county office. It's a great option for people that travel a lot, for people that are away at school, people that are living temporarily out of town, if you're in the military, if you're overseas. It's convenient because it's mailed to your house. You fill it out, you bubble in the circles, the ovals, and you mail it back and you're done. It's convenient. So if you're worried about COVID, if you're worried about exposure to crowds, you don't have to deal with anyone. And so for all those reasons, it's a convenient way to go. Now there are some downsides to that too. It is going to take extra time. It's got to get from the elections office to your house. You've got to vote it and you've got to get it back. If you're going through the postal service, that could take a little bit of extra time. You can return them either back to your elections office directly, or this year Georgia has allowed people to use ballot drop boxes. And for people that are at St. Thomas More, people that live in Decatur, there are a bunch of them in DeKalb County. I actually used the drop box that's right outside of Decatur City Hall. I put it in the drop box on a Sunday evening and it was counted by Tuesday morning. So they have a pretty quick turnaround. If you use the post office, you do have to affix postage to it. But it lets you kind of make the calls. The one last con I would put in this is that there are multiple points of failure in this. If the postal system loses it either on its way to you or on its way back. If you spoil the ballot, if you make a mistake and you have to request a new one, that's going to take more time. You're putting it in other people's hands. So there are issues with that. I know people have asked a lot about the postal system this year. There's been a lot in the news about the postal system. I generally believe the postal system is accurate. I believe they get the mail done. But given the crush they're going to be under during this election season, you definitely need to plan ahead. And once you get your ballot, if you're worried about getting it back through the mail, put it in a drop box or take it to the elections office. And for those in DeKalb County that don't know, the elections office is on Memorial Drive. It's right across from the jail in the original Home Depot building. So those are some vote by mail options and some considerations that may work out for folks. Next, we go to advance in-person voting. That's what's taking place right now. So for the 3 weeks prior to the election day, every county has to offer advance in-person voting. It's sometimes called absentee in-person, advance in-person. It's technically absentee voting. So even though you're physically there casting a ballot on a machine and putting it in the scanner, it's considered absentee voting unless it's taking place on election day. Some advantages to this is you can vote in any location in your county. And again, the large county, Fulton County has about 30 locations. I think DeKalb has about 15. You don't have to go to any particular place. You can go if one's near your work, if one's near your home, if one's near your kid's school, you can vote at any of those locations. That has to be offered during normal business hours, which is generally, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 or 6. Although a lot of places, a lot of the large counties are adding times. They're adding Saturdays and Sundays, and they're starting before business hours. They're starting as early as 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and going until 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. So I'll give you a resource where you can check to see exactly what the times are, but it varies by county. Some of the smaller counties will only have one location, usually at their main office. Now, voting advance in person is exactly like voting on election day. You go, you show your ID, they create a card for you, you walk over to the voting machine, you make your selections. I'll talk a little bit about the new voting system. We have a new voting system in Georgia that looks a lot like the old one up to a point. You'll mark your ballot on a screen just like you have in the past. The difference is this time, instead of hitting cast ballot and having the machine recorded electronically, now you will print your ballot. A printer that's connected to the machine will print out your paper ballot on a regular piece of paper. You'll be able to review it. You'll be able to make sure that it's got your candidates on it, it's got your selections on it, and then you're going to walk it over to a scanner and you're going to put it in a scanner that's looks like a large fax machine kind of. You feed it in there, it reads it, it drops it in the ballot box, and it's stored. So whether you vote advance in person or whether you vote on election day, your experience is going to be almost identical. But the advantage of advance in person, like I said, you can pick a date and time that fits your schedule. You can pick a location that fits your schedule. You don't have to worry about your ballot not making it back in the mail or not making it back in a drop box or losing it or having your dog chew it up. It's all done right there. You may face a little bit of extra wait times. As you may have seen yesterday and today, especially yesterday, the first day of advance voting, there were people lined up hundreds of voters deep before the polls even opened throughout most of the state. Now, Monday was a holiday, so a lot of people had off and they decided to vote, which was wonderful. Yesterday in Georgia, on the first day of advance voting, we had almost 130,000 people cast ballots. By comparison, in 2016, we had about 80,000 people cast ballots in that presidential election. So we're well over what we did in 2016 already in 2020. The other thing about advance voting is that two other things to keep in mind is that if you do encounter some kind of problem during advance voting, you forget your ID or there's a problem with your paperwork or something doesn't go well, you have time to fix it. Whether it's coming back a different time or straightening out some paperwork before you vote, those things you can do during advance voting because there's generally always tomorrow. On election day, that's the only day you can possibly vote. If you don't get it done on election day, you don't get it done. So if you think there may be a problem, if you've moved and you're not sure where you're going, if you don't know there's some kind of strange situation, I encourage you to consider advance voting because it'll give you a little bit of extra time. Lastly, for folks that are elderly, and elderly in Georgia law for elections is 65 or over, you can go to the front of the line during advance voting. So if you go to advance voting and you're over 65, you can go to the front of the line, bypass the line, vote, and get on out of there. So that's advance in-person voting. And then lastly, the classic version of election day voting. On election day voting, you must go to your assigned polling place. You cannot go to an advanced voting location because they won't be open. Every voter gets a card that gives their polling location. I'm going to give you a resource to find out what that is if you're not familiar. But you must go to your assigned polling place to vote. It's going to be convenient to your home because you're assigned near where you live, but it may not be convenient if you're working. So if you're working far from home, it may actually be less convenient to vote on election day than to vote in advance. But on election day, the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They can only be extended beyond 7 p.m. if a judge orders it, usually based on some type of problem or delay in opening the polls. As I mentioned, there are very few chances to fix errors or mistakes if you go on election day. So you're sort of stuck with what's going on. You must show photo ID, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. The other advantage, some people like to wait until election day because if the situations change, if there's a late breaking development with candidates or issues or problems, then you've got the last chance to vote. I will say that if you vote during absentee by mail or vote in advance, once you vote, you've voted. You can't take it back. You can't change your mind. You can't say, well, this person, they said something that I really don't like now. I want to change my mind. You can't do it. Once you've voted, you've voted. So those are the three options for voting: mail, advance, and in-person election day. Let's go back to voting your absentee ballot because that's the most complicated of the ways to do it. If you do get an absentee ballot, it's going to come to you in the mail, and in it you're going to have the actual ballot, which is kind of a card stock. You'll be able to tell what it is, and it's got ovals and it's got write-in, it's got instructions. It comes with two important other pieces of equipment. One is a white envelope that says official absentee ballot and nothing else on it. Once you mark your ballot, and you mark your ballot by bubbling in the ovals, you don't mark it by underlining the candidate, you don't mark it by putting an X next to them or just check mark or drawing a smiley face or crossing out the person that you don't like. You mark your vote, you cast your vote by bubbling in the oval next to the person you want to vote for or next to the question you want to vote for. Once you do that, you fold it up, you put it in the white envelope, and then, oh, I don't know how that happened. Then the white envelope goes in the yellow and white envelope, which is the return envelope. That should have the county address on it, should be return address should already be on there. You do have to affix postage if you're putting it in the postal system. If you're putting it in a county drop box or delivering it by hand, you do not have to do postage. But you must sign the oath on that outer envelope. The legislature changed the law a couple of years ago. You don't have to put your address, you don't have to put your date of birth, you don't have to put any of that stuff, but you must sign the absentee ballot with your signature. The signature that you sign your ballot with is going to be compared to your voter registration signature, which in many cases is what your driver's license signature looks like. But you'll sign it, and then you'll either mail it back, you'll put it in a drop box, or you'll deliver it yourself. Now, who else can deliver your ballot for you if it's an absentee ballot? Well, a close family member, and that's generally defined as grandparent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, those kinds of folks can take it and mail it or return it for you. If you're elderly or disabled, a caregiver can return it for you, or anybody that lives in the same house can return it for you. What people cannot do is what's called ballot harvesting. So you can't go through a neighborhood and just scoop up everybody's absentee ballot and go door to door and say, hey, if you've got your absentee ballot, go ahead and give it to me and I'll turn it in for you. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One reason is that you don't know who you're giving your ballot to, and you don't know what they may want to do with it. It may be that they're posing as one side, thinking that they'll get your ballot, and they may say, everybody that has this person's sign in their yard, I'm gonna make sure that ballot doesn't get delivered. So the law says you have to mail or deliver your ballot, have a family member or housemate do it, or if you're disabled or elderly, you can have a caregiver do it for you. If you fail to sign the oath, if you forget to sign the oath on the envelope, or for whatever reason it doesn't match, your county has to contact you immediately and give you a chance to fix it. The way you can fix it is they'll mail you a form that you can sign, provide a copy of your ID, and send it back. If you do that, your ballot will count. If you do not do that, your absentee ballot is not going to count. It's going to be rejected. So again, voting your absentee ballot by mail has the most complexity to it and puts the most burden and onus on the voter to make sure they do everything right. It's not incredibly complicated, but you don't want to miss those steps. So those are the ways you can deliver it. Now, let's say you've requested an absentee ballot and you decide you don't want to vote it, or you want to go and vote in person. You can still do that. However, if you do that, if you get your absentee ballot, please bring it with you to your polling place, and you'll be able to cancel it right there. It'll just take a second. You'll write spoiled on the outside of it. You'll turn it over to the poll manager, and you'll get in line and vote like everybody else. If you don't have your absentee ballot, you can still vote in person if you've not returned your absentee ballot, but it's going to take a little bit longer. They're going to have to look you up. They're going to have to call to the office to make sure it hasn't been returned, and then you'll be able to vote. So if you get an absentee ballot and want to vote in person, please bring it with you, turn it in, and vote that way. But if you do change your mind and you don't have your ballot, you can still vote in person. It's just going to take you a little bit longer. All right, let's talk about photo ID. You must, in Georgia, in order to vote in person, you must present photo ID. It must be a government issued ID. 90+% people use their driver's license or their state issued ID card. That's clearly the most common form of ID. Also acceptable is any type of government ID, government employment ID, and that's from a federal government, state government, county government, city government, school government, any government entity that has your photo on it and your name and is issued by a government is going to be acceptable for voting. Note, you do not have to have your current address or even any address on your photo ID to vote. So if you've got a passport, for example, a passport is issued by the federal government. So it's a federal ID. It's got your photo on it. It's got your name on it. What your passport doesn't have is an address. That doesn't matter. Your photo ID does not have to have your current address or any address on it. It only has to be issued by the government. It has to have a picture of you and your identifying name on it. Even school IDs are often acceptable if they're from a public school. If it's from a private school, that's not a government issued ID. If it's from the university, the University System of Georgia, that's a government ID. If it's from Spelman College or another private institution, it's not considered. Barry, for example, it's not a government ID, and it won't be able to use it for voting. If you don't have ID when you go to vote, you're going to vote a provisional ballot, and then you're going to have up to 3 days after the election to turn in your ID. So if you forget your wallet, you go to vote, they'll make you vote a provisional ballot, which is a paper ballot that they'll put in an envelope and set to the side. They'll give you instructions and say, hey, bring in your photo ID or send in a copy of your photo ID to our office and we'll count your ballot. If you don't, we won't. And lastly, on these days where most people have like a lot of their cards and things on their phone, they have pictures of their driver's license. A picture of your driver's license is not photo ID. It's a picture of your driver's license. So you've got to have original documents. You've got to have your original passport, your driver's license, your state ID card, your student ID. A picture of it does not count as ID for voting purposes. All right, when you go to the polls, what are some things you can't do at the polls? Well, when you're inside a polling place, you can't use a cell phone or other electronic device in most cases. There is an exception that I'll talk about in just a second. You cannot take any photographs. You can't campaign or solicit votes for any candidates, parties, or questions. That includes wearing pins, wearing hats, wearing t-shirts for any candidate, party, or question that's on the ballot. So if you go to vote during advance voting or on election day and you're wearing a vote Republican t-shirt, you're breaking the law, or a vote Democrat t-shirt, you're breaking the law. If you're wearing a shirt that says Biden, or a shirt that says Trump, or a shirt that says Harris, or a shirt that says Pence, anybody who's on the candidate, sheriff, doesn't matter. If they're on the ballot, you can't solicit their thing. It doesn't matter that you don't say their name. If you're wearing a hat or a shirt or a button or a pin, that counts as soliciting. That's campaign material, and it can't be worn within 150 feet of a polling place. You may not carry a firearm within 150 feet of a polling place. You can't intimidate voters. You can't offer or give any type of reward or incentive for voting. None of that stuff can take place at a polling place. And some of the stuff you can't intimidate voters or offer anything outside of a polling place either. But these are some things that people may not think about. You may be the biggest supporter of candidate X there is, and like you're going to a Braves game or Atlanta United team, you want to wear the jersey and the hat and the scarf and all that kind of stuff. It works for sports. It doesn't work for voting. So if you get all dressed up to support the home team and you go vote, you're going to be asked to take it off, turn it inside out, return to your car, cover it up, do something like that, because you could very likely be in violation of state law. All right. Now the one exception for electronics that I didn't mention, let me go back to here. The electronics that are available, if you are disabled, if you're illiterate, or you have a vision issue, you can use your own cell phone or iPad or device to help you read your ballot. Don't know if that'll apply to a lot of folks, but the law does allow visually disabled folks to use an electronic device to help them read their ballot so they can confirm their choices. So that's one exception to that rule. Well, okay, what if you need help? So you go to vote. First of all, if you have a physical disability, you're entitled to assistance. If you have a physical disability, if you're blind or you're illiterate, the law allows you to ask anybody you want to help you. So you can bring your spouse, you can bring your child, you can bring your friend, you can bring your next door neighbor, you can bring a total stranger if you want. When you check in, you will need to tell them that you're disabled and that you need assistance, and this is the person that's helping you. Now, you don't have to tell anybody what your disability is. You don't have to prove that you're disabled. You just simply say, look, I've got a disability and this person is going to assist me voting. You'll sign the voter certificate. The person assisting you will sign the voter certificate, and you'll go to vote just like everybody else. The person who's assisting you will be able to do whatever you want or need them to do, whether it's touching the touch screen to make the selections, whether it's handling your ballot, whether it's feeding it in the scanner because you can't physically do it. Any of those things are possible. So, but it's important that you tell the people when you're checking in that that's what you're taking advantage of. Otherwise, because if you're not disabled, if you don't have a disability, you cannot have somebody help you. So just because you want to vote with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your best friend or whoever because you think it'll be fun, you can't do that. You can't go into a voting booth with anyone unless they're legally providing assistance. If you just need help, if you don't understand how the system works, or you think you got the wrong ballot, or the printer jams when it's printing out your ballot, anybody can get assistance or instruction from a poll worker to answer a question like, hey, I think I'm done, but how do I print my ballot? And they can tell you, okay, there's a button at the bottom, make sure you press that and your ballot will print. So if you ever need help or you think something's going wrong, raise your hand, get the attention of a poll worker, let them come over and answer your question, give you advice, give you help in getting through the process. Once you scan your ballot, once you take that piece of paper and you put it in the scanner, you have voted and there's no way to get it back. But up until the point where you put it in the scanner, you have not cast your ballot. And if you need to change something, if you need to fix something, if you review your ballot like you're required to do and make sure that you've got all the right people on it, if you see something on there, say, hey, and your ballot will tell you, for example, if you forget to mark a race, it'll tell you that. It'll let you do it, but it's going to say, hey, you didn't vote for the sheriff. And if you don't want to vote for the sheriff, that's fine. You don't have to, and it'll work just fine. But if you look down and you say, wait, I didn't vote for the sheriff, I must have forgotten about that one. Raise your hand, get a poll worker to come over. They'll get you a new card. They will take your old ballot and spoil it, and then you'll go through the process again. So the bottom line is, if you've got a problem, ask for help. If you're disabled or blind or illiterate, you're entitled to legal assistance. There's a slight difference between those two, but the bottom line is, don't be shy when you go to vote. If you need something, ask for it and let the people offer help. Let's see, making our way through here. All right, what happens on election night? So you voted either advance or in person on election day or by mail. When does it get counted? When are you going to get results? There's a lot of talk this year about when people are going to know the results of the election. In Georgia, election officials are able to count absentee votes up to 2 weeks before the election. So they'll actually be able to start counting votes this coming Monday. They'll be scanning them in. Now, they won't be able to produce any totals, and nobody will be able to know, who's winning or how many votes any candidate has gotten during that counting. But what it means is that on election night, after having scanned thousands and tens of thousands of ballots, they'll have all the votes on a memory card that they'll be able to upload to results and save hours and hours and hours of scanning. Generally, by about midnight or shortly after midnight, all counties have uploaded their election day results. So by midnight or 1 o'clock, there's a very, very good chance that most of the votes in Georgia will be counted and will be publicly reported. Now, absentee ballots that are delivered the Monday and the Tuesday of the election day may not have been counted yet. So those still may need to be counted on the Tuesday night or the Wednesday after the election. Votes from overseas that are postmarked by election day have 3 days to get in. As I mentioned, if you vote a provisional ballot, you have 3 days to bring ID and show that you have ID. So there's always a little bit of delay to get every last ballot counted. But by and large, in Georgia, we should have a pretty good idea by the early morning hours of Wednesday morning what the totals are going to look like. Okay, and then I think this slide again, largely covers what we do. One thing that's new in Georgia for the first time is we're doing an audit after the election. That has to be done by the time the state certifies, which is the third Friday after the election. But for the first time, the state will be doing a risk limiting audit to confirm the results of the election. So that's pretty exciting. It's a little bit complicated to go into the details, but there's just even more assurance that what happens at the polls and what the votes show is going to be confirmed by a risk limiting audit done after the election. All right, some key things to remember, and we're almost done. If you go to vote and you encounter some kind of problem and somebody tells you you can't vote for whatever reason, you can always ask for a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot is kind of is your life vest, your life raft, whatever you think about it. For whatever reason, somebody may have made a mistake. Maybe you're not. Maybe you thought you registered to vote, but you know what? You forgot to mail it in, and they say, "Look, we can't find you on the system. You're sure you registered to vote, or you believe you registered to vote. You vote a provisional ballot," and it gives them days, 3 days after the election to figure it out. So it keeps you alive, keeps you in the game. If you go to the wrong polling place and vote a provisional ballot, your votes will count up to the point where the ballot stops being common to what you had before. So for example, if you go to the wrong polling place in your county, your vote for president will still count. Your vote for senator will still count. Your vote for other senator will still count. If you get down to the level where your local district change, your ballot is not going to be duplicated, but it'll be duplicated up to that point. But when in doubt, and so if you're being told you cannot vote, you can always ask for a provisional ballot. The resource that I mentioned, you can see on this slide, mvp.sos.ga.gov is the Secretary of State's website. You log into this site and it gives you your voter registration information. It shows you where you vote. You can look at sample ballots. You can see what districts you live in. You can see election calendars. You can change your information if you got married and your name changes, if you move, any of those things that you can do all that through the MVP site. It's really your one-stop shop for voter information in Georgia. And I think that ends the slides that I presented. It's a lot to cover. There's a lot of law that can add some subtlety to some of these situations, but by and large, that's how voting works in Georgia. As the total crowd, do you have any questions after that whirlwind?
Chris, I joined Shelley's account.
Oh, hey, Shane.
Hey, so there's actually two of us.
Okay.
So we did request absentee ballots, but then we pulled them out and we realized there were actually, it looked like they were the ballots for the previous election, like some kind of runoff or something. So then we should be good to just go to early voting. And we should be covered, right?
You should. Again, timing is sort of everything on this. If you requested a ballot for the general election and you haven't gotten it, you can contact the county and confirm whether or not they have you down for one. It's unusual that you would have gotten one for a runoff this late. But it's possible. But at the worst thing that can happen, I mean, is that you go to vote and they say, hey, you've already requested an absentee ballot. You say, well, we never got it. They can cancel it and you can vote right there.
Okay.
But I would recommend calling DeKalb County and say, hey, we're unclear. We got this old ballot, but we don't know if it was delayed from the previous election or if we got sent the wrong one. The county shouldn't be sending out any old ballots. I mean, they destroy that stuff after the election. So it may be something that was hung up in the postal system from a previous election. But yeah, the worst, in the worst case scenario is that you go and they have to cancel the ballot.
Okay. All right. That sounds
and I see Mary Jane. Do you have a question?
Well, it looks like you're on mute.
Let's see. I see Mary Jane's raising her hand. This is.
Sorry, Chris, I didn't realize
okay.
I had muted. Okay, you mentioned that you had put your ballot in a box and then you checked to see if it had been recorded. Is that website that is sitting up here, is that the one you use to check?
No, good question. It's actually a service called Ballot Tracks. It's BALLOTRAX. Do a Google search on Ballot Tracks. All you have to do is put in your name, I think your date of birth and your county, and it will automatically, you'll basically register. And then when your county sends you your ballot, you'll get a text, and you get to decide how you want to be notified. It can be a phone call, it can be an email, it can be a text. You can set up like the time frames you want to be notified. So they'll notify you when they send you the ballot. They'll notify you when they get it back and that it's been counted.
And the fact that I already have my ballot but haven't filled it out yet doesn't affect anything you said.
No.
Okay.
The only thing is, obviously, they won't tell you they've sent it because that's already happened. But
Right.
if you were to vote it tonight and put it in the Dropbox in downtown Decatur, I would suspect probably tomorrow or the next day, you would get either a text, phone call, or email from this ballot track service that said, hey, your ballot has been accepted. You're good to go.
Okay, some of us have been concerned how often those ballot boxes were collected. But from what you've said, they're collected frequently.
Yeah, they're collected for the first 2 weeks of advanced voting. They have to be collected, I think, every third day. And during the last week, they have to be collected every single day.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I apologize. I didn't realize we had all these other participants. This is the first time I've hosted one of these Zoom things. So the hosting, I'm sure, leaves a lot to be desired. I've been on a billion of them, but the only person that was showing up on the thing.
I just can't see you, Chris. Where are you?
Well, you see my screen instead, which is better looking than I am anyway. Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any questions?
I have
like
a
I said, it's a world. Yes, Sonia.
Hi, Chris. Great
Hey.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a college student like you, and we requested an absentee ballot, but it's only been a couple of days, so we what's the latest that he can send it in before I have to like go grab him and bring him down to vote in person instead?
I would say I would feel very comfortable if I put an absentee ballot in the mail the Monday or Tuesday of the week before the election.
Okay.
If it got beyond Tuesday, depending on how far away you were, I'd be a little bit concerned. You'd still probably be okay. Once you get to Thursday and Friday before the election, then you're really kind of playing with fire. It just really depends. The Postal Service, they say 3 to 4 days or 3 to 5 days on first class mail,
Right.
and they generally are pretty good with that. But it gets tighter the closer you get.
Okay, and I think we requested it to be sent to his school, but he's registered here. I don't know if we did that right. So
yes, you did. I did the same thing with Jude. You have to put, when you request it, you put where you're registered, but then you can have it mailed someplace else. And so if you put his school address, it should go to his school. He'll vote it. All he has to do is sign the back of it and then send it back.
Great. Okay.
Now, one thing he will not want to do, he wants to make sure he does not put it in a Dropbox in Rome or wherever he is, because that's specific for the county.
Okay.
So your county Dropbox is just for that county. If he puts his DeKalb County ballot in Floyd County box, it isn't going to work.
Okay. So he needs to mail it back.
Mail it back or bring it back and hand deliver it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That was great. Great job.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you all for getting on here. And like I said, this is being recorded, so maybe it'll be put on later. And if you have questions, like I said, contact your county, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer them the best I can. Vote early. And good luck. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot,
Bye.
Chris.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We're praying for you. I know your
Thank
your
you.
job stuff.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good luck. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.